Good morning, my lovely little ghosts, and welcome to the Dark Orchard. I'm Laura, and this is a Falling in Reverse video. As I said in my intro, this is a Falling in Reverse video. More specifically, today I'm going to be doing another historical analysis for a music video. What music video? I'm Not a Vampire, Revamped by Falling in Reverse. You ghosts really loved my Palais Royale historic breakdown when they released the song Tonight is the Night I Die, and I did a historic breakdown of their costumes. So, I thought I would do the same for this video. I'm going to be breaking down the costumes from what I visually see, and using my fashion design knowledge to tell you about the different outfits, and I'm going to try to guess what time period this video is set in, because unlike the other video, it's not as obvious. And of course, we'll get to why it's not obvious. But before we get into the historic breakdown, let's talk about the hot topic revolving around this music video. Now, if you've been on Twitter in the time between the video releasing and now, and if you're part of the alt music Twitter community, you've seen this everywhere, because I have. Some members of the Royal Council recognized the house used, because, ironically, it's the same house that Palais Royale used for Tonight is the Night I Die. And they're also pointing out the similarities between the themes, because they're both music videos about vampires. Both music videos are about vampires, and both music videos used the same chateau. So fans quickly recognized the staircase from the opening sequence of I'm Not a Vampire to be the exact same staircase as the one that Remington jumps off of in Tonight is the Night I Die. And here's a contrast of the two scenes, both Remington jumping from the balcony and of course the opening sequence of the Falling in Reverse I'm Not a Vampire Revamped. And of course this is the opening of the Falling in Reverse video where we see the hallway. And then this is the chase scene where Remington jumps off of the balcony in their video. This gorgeous chateau is Le Chateau Rose. Its architecture was inspired by Marie Antoinette's vacation home in Versailles. And just so we're clear, this is the hallway that everyone recognized, with the gorgeous ceiling and the drop chandelier, and then the stairway on both sides, with the sculptures that were not moved in either video. This chateau is rented for a minimum of $3,000 for things like this, for music videos, for filming purposes, and it's rented out as a location. It's a gorgeous French-inspired location, and because it's French-inspired, it makes sense that it was used in the Palais Royale video, because we established that that video was primarily either influenced by or set in France. However, I also believe that it was a perfect location for Ronnie's music video because it is very elegant and vampire-esque. It just fits with that vampire theme, and it's a lovely chateau that's not quite the California mansions that you see. It has a bit of classic elegance to it, which I believe is why all of these vampire-themed music videos are so drawn to the location. I do understand the appeal from both artists. So, let's start talking about the clothing. When I saw this video and I saw that the clothing had historic significance, I was ecstatic. I was so hyped to film this video. I pulled so much research, I was reading, I was jotting down notes, like it took me a solid 2 days to gather everything together. I was just so excited. So without further delay, let's get started. Let's talk about these ensembles. Just because I'm leading up to my timeline thesis, I'm going to be jumping throughout the video instead of starting beginning and going to end. So the first thing I want to talk about is the angry mob. Now on first glance, you may be like, they're just random dudes. But their outfits do have a bit of historic significance. If you look at this gentleman right here, he's wearing denim overalls and a plaid shirt. Probably thinking, well, that's modern, that's normal. Yeah, because people still wear this. But it has some interesting origins. Denim overalls and plaid shirts became popular to the working class in the 20th century. The majority of farmers, miners, and railway workers could be seen wearing denim overalls and plaid shirts. Levi Strauss was making riveted jeans in the 1870s in San Francisco, so in America. And those jeans became readily available to the working class. Because if you remember from my last video, I believe I mentioned that in the late 1800s, we began getting off-the-rack clothing, especially in like the bigger cities in America, and of course places like London and France. Off-the-rack was becoming more popular. It was ready-made clothing in different sizes versus having to order from a magazine. Now, of course, once that hit the bigger cities, it took a while for it to expand, and on into the 50s, people were still ordering from a catalog. Up until the 90s, people ordered from a catalog. But the off-the-rack notion was out there, and especially for workers, they could go into a shop and find clothing that fit them for their purpose. And overalls were so simple to fit because they knew a generalized way to make them so that the straps were adjustable, the pants were just certain widths. Overalls were just super simple to put on people for work. And they protected a little bit better than a normal trouser would because they were made of denim. And also, plaid shirts became a symbol of the working class in the early 20th century. You can also see other men in the screenshot of the mob wearing plaid shirts as well. So we're going to put a pin in that for our timeline. So the early 20th century, we know that denim and plaid were very readily available for the working class citizens. So stick a pin in that. So with that pin stuck, let's narrow it down. Let's talk about the first time that we see Ronnie. The first outfit that we see in the entire video is this one. Since ancient Rome, black has been a staple in fashion. It has been a symbol of elegance and power and wealth. Also, 1800s, purple became a symbol of wealth, but we're not talking about purple. We're talking about black. Of course, in the late 1800s, Queen Victoria took the color black and decided she was going to wear all black to mourn the death of her husband, and she wore it the majority of her life, and therefore people started to associate the color black with sorrow and mourning, but it was still a symbol of elegance because it was the queen wearing it. In the 19th century, black was a very popular color for menswear. Many men were wearing black. Why am I talking about the color black? Well, because in this opening sequence, Ronnie's entire outfit is black. He wears a black overcoat down below his waist. He wears a decorative center-buttoned waistcoat with silver buttons and a matching silver collar pin with a chain and a necktie. The necktie is important because neckties of this style were not worn in the stead of bows and cravats until the 1900s. And of course, his long hair is timeless and I loved it. So moving on from the opening sequence, we move on to when Ronnie is digging in the yard. He's seen wearing a poet's shirt, or as some people call it, a pirate's shirt, a Renaissance shirt, a romanticism shirt sometimes, but it's a poet's shirt. It's a loose-fitting shirt that actually is made out of a square and a couple of rectangles. It has billowy sleeves, and it has a ruffle down the center. Very simple shirt. The most tailored part of these shirts are the cuffs on the sleeves. Those can vary. It is a generic poet shirt. It was made popular in the age of Romanticism, which we discussed in depth in my last historic accuracy video, but it did become a timeless staple, and it was very much a timeless undergarment for a long time. So no matter what time period you're seeing things set in, if it's after the 19th century, from like the 19th century to early 1900s, you may see a glimpse of this style undershirt or this style being worn as a shirt for like reading poetry at a picnic, or taking a stroll in a meadow, or reading a book and acting all mysterious while watching horses in a pasture. Like, it's the thing. It's the thing that they do in all the old movies, is the poet shirt. Like, think romance cover. All of those romance novels have the lead man, like Fabio, in those billowy poet shirts. That's what this is. This doesn't really give us a date, but it does give us a grounding point. So no time before the 19th century, which I know is very broad because we've mentioned both 19th century and 20th century. But I promise we are narrowing it down. So next we're going to talk about Ronnie's brown suit. In a memory, Ronnie is seen playing the piano wearing a brown suit. It is a brown suit, and I don't know if you can see it from this angle, but he's also wearing an ivory or white cravat, which points more towards the later 1800s than the 1900s, which we mentioned earlier with the tie. Remember that. Brown was also a very popular color for menswear in the late 1800s into the next decades. Brown never went out of style, it just became more of a social, and then of course it evolved into different tastes in the 60s and 70s, like there was the contrast of wearing earth tones versus vibrant tones, but let's roll that way back because we're not even close to there. We're talking about 1800s to 1900s. And of course in the same sequence where we see the brown suit jacket, we also see Paige in this gorgeous blue gown. This gown looks very similar to one that would have been worn in the late 1800s. It has the open chest with the shoulders slightly covered. So transitioning from like the 1890s to the 1900s. In a somewhat pulled back shot, you can see that it flares off of her hips. It would have the large backside. This appeared to be a cohesive princess-like silhouette, but it's gorgeous and I absolutely love the straps across the front. So let's roll it back a little bit and talk very briefly about the officer that is at the door asking if Ronnie has seen any of the missing vampire victims. This is the officer. He's seen wearing a uniform that is very similar to uniforms worn in the West in the United States. Very cut and dry here. This is a police uniform from the early 1900s in San Francisco, and this is the officer that answered the door. You can clearly see the similarities, the buttons down the front, where he wears his badge, and the fact that there's also a symbol on his hat. It could just be a dated police uniform costume choice, but this is just my deduction from all the fashion knowledge. So my synopsis is, this was intentional, and it's early 1900s in the western part of the United States. Very briefly, let's talk about who I am dubbing Lantern Man. Lantern Man is carrying a French-style lantern, but his is painted red, which could very well mean it's from the mines, or it's from a fireman. One of the two careers would be toting a lantern just like this. So on the flip side of that, Ronnie is wearing a very different outfit than the ones we've seen before when he opens the door. So Ronnie's outfit when he opens the door for the officer and Lantern Man is actually the most unique look into the era that we get thus far. Ronnie's shirt has what we call a Peter Pan collar or a raquette collar. This color was coined in 1905 for a production of Peter Pan. The collar sits atop a satin cravat tucked into a double-breasted plaid waistcoat. This waistcoat was just like and of course he's wearing a black overcoat. This styling leans very heavily towards the 1920s Western America, especially the double-breasted plaid waistcoat. This kind of waistcoat, especially the patterned double-breasted waistcoats, were very popular in the 1920s Western America. So let's transition into Paige leaving. This ensemble was adorable. I loved it. I loved the bow on the back, which I do not have an image of, but it's just more reason for you to watch the music video to see that cute little bow on the back. But this entire ensemble was very interesting. As you can see, I've compared her light colored gown to the gown that Rose wears near the ending of Titanic, which of course took place in the early 1910s. And she's also wearing an early 1900s style night robe, which is the coat very similar to the one that Rose wore. She's also carrying a brown leather suitcase, which, you guessed it, was made popular in the early 1900s. I think we've very much narrowed down taking those pins out because we've pretty much gotten to the end of the timeline assumptions. We're getting there, so we're going to just take all those pins out and continue with the assessment. So this next one was just something that caught my eye, and it may not mean anything, but it may mean something. I know Ronnie's a stickler for details, so it may mean something. So, by 1925, half of the United States was covered in electricity. Now, by covered, I mean big cities. I mean, like, places that were heavily populated. And in this screen cap, while Ronnie is drowning his sorrows, you can clearly see 2 fixtures with lighting. Electric lighting. But also throughout the video, there are many candles. So it's easy to assume that this is the transitioning period in the 1900s, where homes were shifting from candlelight and lamplight to electricity. Next is a little bit of a Debbie Downer. The next thing I'm going to talk about is an outfit that Paige wore that did not quite fit in anywhere. That would be this one. If we're saying that this video takes place in the 1900s, this would not have been fashionable at all. However, it's plausible. Hear me out. By the 1920s, people were starting to transition out of corsetry and tight boning into the flat corsets that flappers wore because they didn't want to accentuate. They wanted to have like a straight figure. So her fashion thus far has been focused in the very early 1900s, when corsetry was still relevant, but it wasn't fashionable. They were starting to buy slimming girdles and things that didn't require such strong boning as a corset would. So I'm just gonna go off on a limb and say that this is just a artistic, sexy fashion choice because she looks fabulous in a corset. It accentuates all of this and also draws the attention to not only the corsetry work, but the deep red that probably has a lot of significance because this is a vampire themed video and she's wearing a scarlet red coat. And then, of course, those long flowy curls, that porcelain skin, the pouty lips. Like, this screenshot is stunning. So, free pass with a corset if we're thinking the timeline that we've been thinking. Because even some historic films still do this. And also, there's the corset scene in Titanic where Rose is being put into a corset as late as the 1910s. So, it is possible. Just think, like, the older generation and their undergarments, how they clung onto them. Same thing here. It could have been she grew up wearing a corset, so this is just what she's used to. That could be a very easily explained way to say she's wearing a corset because of this. But I'm just going to say it's a modern artistic take, just like in some films. And of course, no woman would ever wear her corset without something underneath it to protect her body from the tightness of the corset and the boning. Because if you've ever worn a corset and it been super tight on you, it leaves marks. And women avoided that by wearing a chemise underneath their corset to protect their body from that. So you would see a little bit of lace above the hemline of the corset if they were going historic with it. So once again, I'm just saying that this is just a beautiful artistic choice. But this is where I got so excited. This is the part where I was like, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. That would be Ronnie's victims. All of the victims at this gathering are wearing 1920s formal wear. All of the 100% confirmed humans until dead were wearing 1920s formal wear. This gown specifically is much like my Ariel flapper dress that I have that is dark green with black embellishments. And as you can see here, I've compared her black drop dress to the drop dresses from the 1920s. These are fashion plates that show almost identical looking dresses to the one that his victim is wearing. So when he drops that victim, we get to see the trousers he's wearing. These are front button trousers. They're also known as sailor pants. These are front button trousers with a broad fall. The broad fall, of course, is the large square of fabric that would flop down or fall. The broad square of fabric that would fall when unbuttoned. These trousers are also known as sailor pants. In the 1800s, these trousers had a total of 15 buttons, some of which were hidden. By the 1900s, this had been modified to only having 13 buttons. And those 13 visible buttons were said to represent the 13 colonies. Can you imagine unbuttoning 13 to 15 buttons every time you had to unbutton your pants? So let's jump to what Ronnie is wearing when he's taken by the mob, because surprisingly, it's not something we've seen thus far. Here, he was wearing a collared dress shirt with black buttons down the front, which I absolutely adored, by the way. I loved the black button detailing, because they're not just buttons, they're rounded buttons like a pearl button. And also the collar on this shirt appears to be a Hamilton collar, which was a short, stiff collar popular in the 1920s. So, all this rambling, where does it take us? What does it mean? Why have you just been throwing dates at me this whole time? Well, here's my conclusion. I believe that Ronnie became a vampire in the 1800s. Possibly late 1800s, but in the 1800s as a whole. Because we see the age of romanticism blossoming in that poet shirt, but then it progresses and we see different decades represented. And it appears that that vampire that was made prior to the 1900s fell in love with a girl that was alive in the 1900s. My theory, my synopsis, is that the present time in the music video is the 1920s. So timeline would be vampire in the 1800s, then we move to the 1900s when he meets the girl, and then the girl becomes a vampire herself, and the mob comes after him, and he kills the citizens and all of that, cusping the 1920s. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that's just what I deducted from the costuming. So let's talk a little bit about the revamp of the song. First of all, I love that he named it a revamp, because vampire, revamp, it's quirky and it's cute. One of my favorite scenes from the entire music video is Paige scrubbing the blood off the floors. This scene right here, this is the one I was talking about. This is so gorgeous. Aesthetic. Stunning. So she literally witnessed him going through his changes, the vampire changes, but of course the song has a dual meaning now with its actual original meaning, meaning the battle with addiction, and of course the battle with becoming a vampire. This character watched as her lover succumbed to that addiction, and she also sees him burying the victims, and it's like a lover watching her lover in the vice of addiction. And of course saying that I'm not a vampire, I'm not a zombie, is playing into the denial aspect of addiction, which we all know from the original music video, the original version of the song. It's sort of like the I can stop anytime, the I'm not a vampire, of course I'm not a vampire. But in the revamped version, Ronnie is literally barreling down towards the vampire instincts. At the end of the revamped version of I'm Not a Vampire, he full out admits I am a vampire, which is admitting to that vampiric addiction. So the added parts of the song gave me actual chills. Like the added parts at the end. Whew, so amazing. I actually teared up listening to this and seeing all of the artistic elements that went into this song specifically. The raw screams of I am a vampire chilled me to the bone. The orchestrated ballad sound was absolutely phenomenal. It was gorgeous, it was art, and it was just magical. So we got The Drug in Me As You Imagined, February 13th of 2020. Then we got I'm Not a Vampire Revamped, February 12th. So are we going to see a song possibly resurrected? February 11th, 2022? With Ronnie, I don't believe in coincidences. This man knows how to wait on things. He knows how to draw an audience for sure. Can you just imagine if we get one a year until 2033? My mind would be absolutely blown. So the same day that we got I'm Not a Vampire Revamped, we also got an advertisement for a live show. The live show advert does have clocks in it, which makes me think that time is playing a very important part in things that he's coming out with right now. The live show is called Live from the Unknown, and they will be April 16th and April 30th. The advertisement says that there will be 2 shows, and each show will have a different experience, and it's supposed to be a unique experience. So I will be posting the links down below. I'll be posting the link to the video at the end of this video and down in the description. And of course, at the very end of the music video, he dedicated his music video to Derek Jones, which was so heartfelt, and if I hadn't been teary-eyed before that point, I was at that point. So for the comments down below, either tell me which outfit was your favorite from this video, or tell me if you like the original song better or this revamp. And if you don't talk to me about that, talk to me about something, because I'd love for you to talk to me down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you come around again soon. Say bye. Bye!